is going to present that for us.
Before you do that, should we just, let me, for the folks who might be watching, just announce at least the commissioners that are on. I'm Rick Nelson, Chair Pro Tem, Fran Kelleher, who is also a commissioner, Roy Priest, the chair of our commission, and Jeff Merkowitz is another commissioner of HOC. The rest of the folks on the call are HOC staff.
Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, Commissioners. As Cornelia mentioned, I will be discussing the first quarter budget to actual statements for FY21. Okay. Before we begin, I would like to address the impact of COVID-19 on our income statements. In the packet and charts we are presenting today, you will notice a positive income variance in many properties, which may be partially offset by bad debt. At the time the FY21 budget was developed, we reduced the property income in attempts to project the impact of COVID-19 on rent collection. The true impact will not be reflected on the income statements until after it is 90 days in arrears as an allowance for bad debt. Therefore, our statement only reflects rents paid through July. Our review of the accounts receivable balance as of September 30th showed an increase of approximately $700,000 when compared to July 30th. We anticipate that there will be additional allowances for bad debt due to the 90-day timeframe.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Because I was looking at this, and I'm not sure why we have to wait until after the 90 days, but is it possible to at least give us an indication of those that are potentially subject to 90 days so that we can get some picture of really where we are?
So everything that's a receivable right now, you know,
Subject to it.
is subject to it. The problem is we don't know whether or not someone is going to necessarily be able to pay between then and now. I think it's fair to say that, you know, we've seen a large increase in our receivable as well as an increase in our allowance. So I think it's fair to say that a good portion of that will probably have to be set aside as an allowance.
And so I guess the other and sort of related question would be, is there a norm for what those receivables are outside of the COVID period?
Yeah, they're usually closer to $1 million, maybe a little over $1 million. And they're much higher now. They're closer to 5 million probably now.
Okay. That is
Bad news.
That is distressing, but understandable. And yes, it is bad news, but at least it, for me, helps to give a little perspective to where we really are versus where the numbers show us.
And important to understand that we are, after 90 days, setting aside bad debt expense and an allowance, which obviously will reduce our net income. And so we're only a few months behind in terms of that you being able to see that, if that helps. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Tommy.
No problem. All right, so we will start by looking at page 9, which is attachment A. Thank you. The agency ended the quarter with a net cash surplus of $623,314. This surplus resulted in a first quarter budget to actual positive variance of $3,008,886 when compared to the anticipated first quarter net cash flow deficit of $2,385,572. The primary causes of the variance were higher cash flow in some of the unrestricted opportunity housing properties as a result of property performance and savings in various expense categories in the general fund. If we stick to page 9, the first line will have the general fund. The general fund ended the quarter with a deficit of $2,068,411, which is the result of a positive variance of $1,435,305 when compared to the projected deficit of $3,503,716. Income in the general fund was $80,297 less than budget. Expenses in the general fund were $1,515,602 lower than budgeted, primarily as a result of lower drawers from the OHRF for real estate personnel and pre-development costs. A portion of these savings is the result of timing issues, and staff does not anticipate the full savings to be realized by year end. If we stay on the same page, we'll see the bond fund. The positive expense variance in the bond fund was a result of small savings in most administrative accounts in the budget. Later today, we will present an amendment rolling forward unspent FY20 funds. Moving on to the Opportunity Housing Fund. We'll begin by looking at the Development Corporation properties on page 10, which is attachment B. Thank you. This chart is broken into two pieces, unrestricted and restricted properties. For the properties with unrestricted net cash flow, the properties with unrestricted net cash flow generated cash flow of $1.77 million, which is $241,000 higher than projected. In our review, we determined that this variance is often largely attributable to items such as higher tenant income, bad debt, and maintenance. This is true with the Barclay, the Glenmont, Montgomery Arms, scattered sites 1 and 2, Paddington, and the VPCs. As stated earlier, the income in several properties is showing a positive income variance that may be offset by additional bad debt expense. At the bottom of this page, you will see properties with restricted net cash flow. This group ended the quarter with a $131,000 higher cash flow than budgeted as a result of higher tenant income. The positive cash flow variance was primarily resulting from the Oaks and Metro Point. If we move on to page 11, we'll look at the Opportunity Housing properties. The properties with unrestricted net cash flow generated cash flow of approximately $921,000, which is $1.3 million more than projected. Similar to the DevCorp properties, the variance is often largely attributable to higher tenant income, bad debt, and maintenance expense. The restricted properties in this group would also at the bottom of this page. Cash flow for this group was $118,964 higher than budgeted. When looking at the properties, the variances were often attributable to higher tenant income, bad debt, and savings in various expense categories. I'll be happy to address any questions you may have for these properties at this time. If there are no questions, we will move on.
I have a question, I guess, just in terms of the timing issues that you raised, and that, you know, if we've got, looks like about, you mentioned $4 million more in receivables than we did at this time, but we've got like around a $3 million positive variance. Is that just an issue of that we budgeted the expected loss for this quarter, but we're not going to sort of recognize it until next quarter, or were these different losses that we were expecting this quarter that didn't materialize?
So for the first quarter, as I think maybe Tommy did mention, we took into account the effects of COVID-19. Mm-hmm. So we reduced the expected rents that we would get for the first quarter. And so that's probably also why you're seeing a little bit of not as bad of a reduction as you might expect, because we took into account a haircut for the first quarter on the rents.
Right.
So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
But it sounds like we took it into account, but we're not actually going to recognize it until next quarter.
Only 2 months of it, again, because we have the 90-day lag of receivable. That's been our policy of recognizing bad debt expense for a long time, is that anything over 90 days, we'll set up the allowance, which will then hit the bad debt expense.
Right. So when we did the budget, we estimated approximately $2.8 million of revenue in the first quarter. And as Cornelia had mentioned, we've only written off about 1 month, a third of that. What complicates it is we projected COVID to end after the first quarter, and obviously we are deep in COVID continuing. So we will anticipate that we'll have continued write-offs for non-receipt of rent in months beyond September. So we have additional non-receipt in October and November, and at this point, we're not doing a budget amendment because we do not know when those non-receipt of rents will cease.
Yeah, small
so
correction.
That we can get a true picture of year end.
We didn't project it to end. We had no idea.
We were projected the non-receipt of rent to end.
What we
that
did,
moment, and said we'd come back.
No, I mean, and I think what Stacy's trying to say is we didn't know how much more a reduction we'd have to take and how long it would be going on. So we only went through the first quarter with the understanding that we would probably need to revisit this in the second and third quarter.
We recognize that we're going to have to make another adjustment. And part of it was the order of magnitude, we could just never imagine exactly where it was going to be. It actually early on was a lot better than we thought, and it's gotten progressively worse over the most recent months. And so and I think we mentioned this to the BFNA, but also the entire commission as we kind of careen toward finalizing the budget. But we recognize that we're going to have to give it some more thought based on what we know and what's ahead of us.
I think, as I recall, there were so many moving parts. We weren't sure what Congress might do in terms of relief or the state might do in terms of relief. And we see that that's been stalled. And so that certainly isn't helping anyone here in terms of that. I would also just point out for anyone listening into this for the first time, a reminder that we operate on a fiscal year that began July 1st. So these numbers are not a calendar year where we're virtually finished and looking at what it might be in reality for the whole year. We're only looking at the first quarter of our fiscal year from July 1st to September. So.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was trying, with the timing issues, trying to get a sense of whether, we had actually done better than expected this quarter, but it doesn't sound like it. It's just and whether we were expecting another big hit next month that wouldn't have accounted for the allowance that we're going to have to recognize now in that quarter. But it sounds like it may be sort of a double whammy. I mean, we'll be doing some catching up to this quarter, but then if there was if there's unbudgeted losses that we're now expecting, we're going to be facing those as well.
Right. Well, given the time of year, typically we expect some level of arrearage in this sort of holiday season. COVID and job loss and lagged, stalled, as Commissioner Kelleher points out, stalled stimulus and other governmental support obviously exacerbates that.
Yeah.
But I'm sorry, I want to go back though. We've written off, or not written off, we've put bad debt expense for 30 days worth of the 3 months, which means that there's 60 days still not yet. What did we anticipate you also made the statement that the first quarter was actually a little bit better. And not to say it was good, but it was a little bit better than we had anticipated. So it still gets to the question in terms of the first quarter. How much better was it? Or, and I mean, I'm still trying to get a handle. I understand the second quarter is going to be not good, and particularly in terms of what we projected, because we didn't project a high amount because we just didn't know. And we'll have to deal with that as we go along. But if I'm hearing you correctly, in terms of our projection, we still have a slight cushion from the first quarter over what we had anticipated to be bad debt expense, which will help to absorb some of the second quarter. Is that correct, or at least you understand what I just said?
I think I understand it. I don't know that I'd be so generous as to call it a cushion.
Yeah,
But-
I think it's more timing than a cushion, I think.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think so. First quarter, I think we were projecting collections of somewhere in the 70-ish%, and Cornelia jump in.
A little bit higher, Stacy.
higher.
I think it was closer to 80%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we had closer to 90, right?
Total cash, yes, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and then we disaggregated the data a little bit and found that we were just a few points ahead of our actual net collection for that time period. And when I say net, I mean netting out payments on
Old debt.
right. And so we were probably a little closer to the 85% range.
Okay.
And so it's not a heck of a lot of cushion if we're
Okay.
going to consider it that. And then it's gotten progressively a little worse over time because we know what the issues are: extended job loss of benefits, et cetera.
Okay, I think that helped me a lot, and I remember the discussion that we had before when we talked about where we were in terms of rent receipts. So I guess the next question for us to think about is, you had anticipated something close to 80%, I think I heard, receipts in the first quarter. What do we anticipate in the second quarter? And therefore, that'll help us to figure out what this is going to look like when we meet at the end of the second quarter.
When we meet at the end of the second quarter, it's going to be ugly.
Yeah, I understand. So when we looking at how high, did we make no allowance for bad debt? So therefore, we're going to be in deep stuff.
No, I mean, we always budget for bad debt. I think we're still running around the 80%. So, but actual, but budget was not at 80%. So we're definitely going to see a decrease in our budget to actual for sure. There's definitely
So
going to be
budget was closer to 100%. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes. As Stacy mentioned, we only forecasted through September with the intention to come back as we gained more information, and we do anticipate we will have a second quarter budget amendment that will incorporate the continuation of the COVID impact.
Okay, that's, I think, something that's important for us to know and to anticipate that we'll have this fuller discussion in terms of sort of the impact of all this on the whole year. Maybe by then we'll know whether the silly Congress is going to give any relief and what impact that might or might not have, and just have a better sense. But
yeah, no, it seems like if the second quarter is going to be ugly, the third quarter has the potential to be even uglier if Congress doesn't provide some relief.
Look, I want to be candid. I think even if Congress provides some relief, as long Right. As long as eviction moratoria exist, we're going to be the last paid. And it's not, it's not it's not the best feeling in the world, but if you consider families who have, they've got other bills and they're sort of managing that, my anticipation is, unfortunately, we're going to be among the last paid. And so I wish I could be more hopeful than that, but
I guess, I mean, I understand that, but I think that where I'm sort of headed is, I'm a little bit concerned the normal timing of our second quarter discussion puts us well into the fiscal year
yes.
and potentially too late to make adjustments that might be necessary. So is there a way for us to look at this and to have a discussion sooner rather than later in terms of potential impact? Because
Sure.
if we're going to have a significantly higher shortfall than originally anticipated, we have to figure out how we're going to deal with it. And we can't wait till February or March to make that decision.
No, understandable. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Commissioner Priest.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, you're probably going to do it anyway, but in terms of going forward, rather than doing this adjustments on a quarter by quarter basis, I would just go ahead and adjust it for the year, annualize it, and see where we are. Make an assumption about if we were going to look at an 80% rent or 75%, and I'd much rather be conservative on that and do it for the whole remaining fiscal year, and then we can see where we are incrementally as we go through each quarter.
I think we can do that. I was going to add, we were going to take a look at, my intent was to take a look at the entire fiscal year and then potentially give kind of a heads up for what we think the first quarter of the next fiscal year would potentially look like. I understood.
No, when we do the budget amendment, we will do it for the entire remaining year.
Very good.
Yeah.
Rick, are you also suggesting that we meet to look at it in a month from now at the end of January? Or because it seemed to me your concern is how do we address expenses as the balancing side of a reduction in revenue, and the time allowed in order to effectively deal with expenses has to be sufficient so that we aren't in trouble at the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying not to put a date or a time on it, but I am in fact asking Stacy for you guys to meet with BF&A much sooner than the normal schedule for second quarter so that we can do that. Because again, I mean, having gone through some of this before on my own, if you wait until later in the fiscal year, you're talking about bigger hits on some things, and it's more difficult to accomplish the reduction in expenses. If you spread it out over 5 months instead of 3 months, it is not as painful. So I'm not trying by that to suggest how we will overcome the deficit, but I'm just saying that I think we have to look at it and have some serious discussion about how we do it, whether we do the formal budget amendment or not, I'm not sure, but we just need to have this discussion.
Yeah.
I understood. And so my aim was for January. So
Okay.
I should have said that. So thank you, Commissioner Keller.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
that's helpful. And that was going to be part of my question as well, is, not expecting an answer today, but, assuming that we are seeing, only 80% collections for the rest of the year, what does that mean for us? Does it mean having to reduce expenses, or is there a reserve that we can tap into, or, what are the implications? So, but that can be addressed later when we've got a fuller picture.
And I appreciate that. I just want to say, for the good of the order, we try to avoid talking expense reduction in a speculative sense and in a, you know, form, because it's purely speculative. So we'll take a hard look at it, and we'll also look at calendar and work to get something scheduled.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, if we move on to page 12, we will review the public fund. So beginning with public housing has a small amount of expenses totaling $2,723 for continued expenses at Emery Grove. On the same page, we have the voucher program. Overall, there was a shortfall of approximately $2.8 million. The HAP shortfall was funded by the HCVP reserve, or net restricted position. HAP admin expenses were higher than anticipated due to administrative fee incomes coupled with a positive variance in administrative expenses due largely to timing of contract expense. The result of the surplus of $445,000, this resulted in a surplus of $445,000. The higher administrative fee income was the result of a higher proration factor and higher administrative fees received on incoming portables. This was coupled with HUD providing additional administrative fees as a result of the reconciliation based on actual utilization.
Is the shortfall in HAP revenue due to timing, or?
No, I believe that there was a recapture, and if Terry can help me out.
So sometimes HUD will withhold some of the revenue that they send us if we're spending a little bit less. And so they have withheld some, but now that we are spending more, we'll be able to get those funds. They will.
So it has to do, commissioners and I guess general public, with the lease up, and
Right.
and so when we are not near 100% leased on our vouchers, because that happens sometimes because we have ebb and flow in timing. As they make an award, they'll take a look, and if it reads sort of 95% leased or whatever it is, they'll hold it back. In some cases, to incentivize the agency to pick up its leasing activity. For us, it's typically cyclical and was planned, and so that really is the shortfall. But the fact of the matter is that there are some years where HAP revenue doesn't cover the administrative costs as well as the actual HAP payment cost. And what I mean by administrative is clearly staff and staff related overhead.
Stacy, the graph on page 22 might help with explaining the utilization of the vouchers, the cyclical nature of that.
There you go.
Yeah, I guess I understand that, and that's why I asked the question of whether it was timing. I mean, There's nothing for us to believe, there's no reason for us to believe that we won't, in fact, by year's end, probably make up for that shortfall in revenue, because they will recognize it, and it won't be probably a long-term deficit.
That's correct. We're actually putting out a PBD RFP, a project-based voucher RFP, very shortly. And so, but if you that chart is extremely helpful, because we're talking about sometimes 2.5 percentage points. So and that actually is the rub. So
okay, fine, thank you.
All right, so we will conclude with the capital budgets on page 14, attachment E. A few properties exceeded the annual capital budget because of unplanned capital work. Not all of the properties have sufficient replacement reserves at the property to cover the overage through September. However, staff is reviewing to see if funding can be covered from other sources. These properties, just the 3 properties, include Georgian Court, McKendree, and Scattered Site 1. And that is all I have. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have at this time.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Tommy. So if there are no other questions, can go on to the second agenda item, which is the unaudited financial statements for the first quarter ended September 30th. And that will be, Francisco will walk us through that discussion.
Good morning, commissioners, and happy holidays.
Morning.
Morning. So the net position increased by 8.9 million from the fiscal year ending 6/30/2020 for a total of 215 million to 224 million this year as a result of the 14.7 million capital contributions from Bauer Park Apartments closing, partially offset by the first quarter 5.8 million net loss. This can be seen on page, pardon me. It's on page 23 of 50. Right in the middle where it's the assets. And unfortunately, we have to scroll back up to the beginning of the packet where the net ratios are, which is page 15 of 50. The liquidity ratios improved due to a significant increase in cash and cash equivalents. In September, the current ratio was 4.02 as compared to 3.94 in June of 2020. The quick ratio was 3.65 in June compared to 3.55 in June of 2020. The total assets, excluding the deferred outflows of resources, increased by 31.8 million or 2.1% from 1.5 in June 2020 to 1.54 billion in September of 2020. Again, this is back on that page that we were just on, so I do apologize for the back and forth, which is page 23 of 50, gives you more of a visual of the decreases and increase. So the increase in total assets was largely due to an increase in mortgage and construction loans receivable, largely due to tax-exempt mortgage loan, seller note, and seller sponsor loan to Bauer Park Apartments LP in connection with the acquisition, renovation, and lease up of Bauer Park Apartments. This increase is partially offset by the repayment of the 900 Thayer LP draws from the PNC Bank real estate line of credit, the RELOC, using the Federal Financial Bank loan proceeds and the LIHTC investor equity. Furthermore, the single-family bond fund also registered a decrease in single-family mortgage loans receivable due to normal amortization. The decrease in unrestricted cash and cash equivalents is primarily attributed to the receipt of the settlement proceeds from Bauer Park Apartments and 900 Thayer. The single-family bond fund and multifamily bond fund likewise remitted portion of the FY21 operation budget contribution to the general fund. Some of the opportunity housing properties likewise registered an increase in the operating cash. This increase in assets was partially offset by a decrease in the following total assets. Restricted cash, cash equivalents, and investments is primarily due to the decrease in single-family bond fund long-term investments in mortgage-backed securities. This is partially offset by an increase in the multifamily bond fund restricted cash and cash equivalents, attributed to the issuance of the 2020 Series A bonds for Bauer Park Apartments acquisition and renovation, and a decrease in capital assets mainly due to normal depreciation of assets. That will summarize our balance sheet. Any questions on the balance sheet itself, commissioners?
Can I ask, just being new here, so what do we have target ratios there for the current and quick ratios that you showed on page 15 there?
So for the current ratio, I would tell you that anything between 1.2 and 2 is is good. So we're doing better than that in regard to the target, as if you want to use a target.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you all, have, specific target performance metrics, ratios that you use generally, or.
We impose this on ourselves. I mean,
Yeah.
most housing authorities don't actually even think about this.
Okay.
For us, having a sense of liquidity,
Yeah.
It given what we're doing is super important. And then based on the last conversation we just had around rent arrearage and so forth, we need to have a good sense of where cash is and how liquid we are from a current standpoint, at least.
Absolutely. Okay, so it sounds like, at least from our own internal targets, we're in pretty good shape there. Okay. Thank you.
All right, but I'll keep in mind, this is September.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I don't want it to be people think it's too rosy, because that's decent, but we expect that to we expect some level of decline as we actually see since March.
Great, thank you.
Okay, if we can go down to page 17 of 50. Thank you very much. The overall agency net income increased by 6.8 million when compared to prior year, same period, 9/30/2019. However, after isolating and adjusting for certain line items, adjusted net loss is 4.7 million. Sorry, 4.6 million. These line items include capital contributions, unrealized gain loss on investments, gain loss on sale of assets, and operating. This is just backing these out. The overall decrease of 4.6 million is driven by the following: decrease in housing assistance payments revenue, mainly due to the transition of the excess HAP revenue as of December 31st, 2019 to HUD health funds through an offset against the July 2020 HAP funding, an increase in HAP expense driven by new programs and increased voucher utilization, a decrease in the other federal, state, and county grants driven by the county main grants, a decrease in investment income driven by the single family bond fund due to the decrease in MBS purchases and lower interest rates, a decrease in interest on mortgage and construction loans receivable, mainly due to a decrease in the average mortgage loan receivable balance in both the single family bond fund and the multifamily bond fund, an increase in other expense largely due to COVID-19 expenses within the general fund and various opportunity housing properties. Lastly, an increase to depreciation and amortization along with utilities. All overall participated in the decrease in revenue. Partially offset by an increase in dwelling rental income due primarily to the addition of the 5 former tax credit properties, which was the Staffmore Court LP, Metropolitan of Bethesda LP, Georgian Court Silver Spring, Barclay One Associates, and the MV Affordable Housing LP. To the transfer to the Opportunity Housing, which occurred November of 2019. Decrease in fringe benefits is mainly due to a decrease in pension expense, other post-employment benefits, and retired employee benefits, partially offset by an increase in contracted managed benefits. Also offset by a decrease in interest expense, primarily attributed to a decrease in the single-family bond fund outstanding bonds payable because of early and scheduled redemptions. Lastly, a decrease in administration, maintenance, and other expenses also contributed. Any questions on this portion, commissioners?
It looks as if the HAP issue that we just went over is the main driver here. Is that a fair assessment?
It's a good piece of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
As you can see of the difference, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. That's going to conclude the presentation on the actual numbers for FY21 Q1. Any questions? Any further questions, Commissioners?
No.
Thank you, Francisco. Next item on the agenda is the discussion of the fiscal year 2021 first quarter budget amendment, and Terry Fowler is going to walk us through that.
Thank you, Cornelia. The FY21 first quarter budget amendment includes some of pro forma items that we typically do in the first quarter amendment, as well as a couple of changes due to property extensions in the Opportunity Housing Fund and the renewal of our fatherhood grant. Within the general fund, we are receiving additional fees from the renewal of the fatherhood grant in the amount of $20,652 in fees. As Tommy mentioned earlier, the multifamily and the single family bond fund had savings in the monies drawn cumulatively through FY20. And this amendment will roll over $241,570 in the multifamily fund and $208,038 in the single family fund. And those rollovers will reduce the projected draws to cover the administrative expenses for FY21. In the Opportunity Housing Fund, we are adjusting the rate on the line of credit for Avondale to equate to what we are actually paying for the debt, which reduces the expenses by approximately $110,000. And that unrestricted cash, if realized at year end, would go to the agency. In addition, Georgian Court and Stewarttown, which were previously tax credit properties that were donated back to the agency, are projected to be resyndicated as tax credits and undergo renovations. The FY21 budget assumed that this would occur by the end of the second quarter, but we are extending the properties in the Opportunity Housing Fund. Stewarttown will extend till the end of March of 2021, and Georgian Court is extending to the end of the fiscal year, or June 30. In addition, we have added a budget for the daycare at 9845 Lost Knife Road to account for the rental payments received and the debt service and replacement for reserve, and that cash is restricted to cover those costs. In the public fund, the fatherhood grant was renewed for a 5-year period, and the renewal was at a rate higher than the previous grant. The renewal is at $998,000 a year, where our previous grant was approximately $695,000 a year, an increase of about $303,000. The additional money is restricted for the services that the grant provides, and this budget amendment adds that beginning October to account for the federal fiscal year of the federal government. Under the capital, we are rolling forward unspent but obligated replacement reserves for capital projects within our Opportunity Housing properties, and that roll forward is approximately $980,000. In addition, the extension of Georgian Court and Stewarttown added small capital budgets for the extension period to account for minor work that may need to be done before renovations commence. This brings us to a surplus of just under $131,000. When our budget was adopted, we projected that we would have to draw under about $360,000. So we will reduce that anticipated draw at this time to account for the additional funds. And that is everything that's included in this budget amendment. And we ask if you have any questions.
Oh,
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. So next item on the agenda is a discussion of the calendar year 2020 third quarter budget amendment. and Terry is also going to walk us through that.
Thank you, Cornelia. When we adopted the FY21 budget, it was anticipated that the syndication of the Bower Park apartments would close in the month of June. The actual conversion to a tax credit did not occur until the end of September 2020. Therefore, we are doing a budget amendment to calendar 20 to account for a budget for the period of October through December of 2020. The property is restricted and both income. I apologize. Cash flow is restricted in the amount of $185,000, and there's a small capital budget to account for any work that is not being done in the renovation budget. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. All right, next item up is our write-off of uncollectible tenant account receivables for the first quarter, and Nila Riziki is going to walk us through that.
Thank you, Cornelia. Good morning, commissioners and everyone. The agency's current policy is to provide for an allowance for bad debt on tenants receivable which have been outstanding for over 90 days. On a quarterly basis, the staff also recommends to the commission the write-off uncollected receivables from past tenants. The proposed write-off for the first quarter of fiscal year 2021 amounted to $78,000, an increase of $32,000 compared to the previous year this time. This period's write-off consists of $41,000 of bad debts from the Opportunity Housing properties, which included TPM Development Corp. MPDU 259, Scattered Sites 1 Development Corporation, Camp Hill Square, State Rental Partnership, and MHLP 164. $21,000 from the Supportive Housing Program, $16,000 from the RAD properties, and a small amount from the public housing. The primary reason for the write-offs across the property include tenants who skipped, voluntarily left their units, passed away, purchased a home, transferred due to medical reasons or to enter another program, and non-compliance with program requirements. After the full commission's approval, the write-off will be processed through Yardi with the tenant detail placed in the debt database. The next anticipated write-off will be for the second quarter of fiscal year 21, which will cover October 1st to December 30, 2020. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
I have a question that I meant to raise earlier, but this reminds me of it. When we look at delinquencies and sometimes occupancy, we've had serious issues with VPC 1 and 2. Help me out, because I'm not sure I fully remember. What is the difference in terms of type of housing for VPC 1 and 2, scattered site, and the MHLP? Aren't they all similar?
So they're all scattered sites.
Yes.
The
And-
VPC 1 and 2 were the former public housing scattered sites. The scattered site 1 and 2 were the former tax credit scattered sites.
That's what I thought. And the question I had as I was going through this is that it seems to me, if I recall correctly, that our experience with VPC 1 and 2 does not compare with the experience with the other scattered sites. What is the difference, and why are we not having as much success with VPC 1 and 2 as we appear to have with the others? And I don't know that you can answer this.
Yeah. Sharnita, are you on the phone?
Yeah, I don't even know if we can.
Well,
I think that's one we have to, gonna have to consider and come back to you with.
all right. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I'm always asking a question about VPC 1 and 2, but it really just hit me as I was going through this that they're really all scattered sites. So why the difference? So if you wouldn't mind, I would like us to hear a little bit about that because it's an ongoing problem.
Sure.
And okay.
Thank you.
One question, interesting, you indicated that one of our residents purchased a home, which led to a write-off. Could you explain that a little bit? Because it sounds, I mean, purchasing a home is a very positive outcome, but is that we anticipated that there'd be income from that resident prior to the time that they actually purchased the home? Can you explain that? Why was that a write-off?
Well, it's a write-off because they're no longer a tenant with us. And so because it's an outstanding receivable and they've left, we
they
write
skipped.
it off. Yeah. So that doesn't mean that we won't still try to collect it through the collection agency or, you know, through our own means. But the reason we are writing it off is because they've left.
Yeah, okay, no, it just sounds like, in a way,
That they should pay us, right?
Yeah.
And if they, I mean, most of the people who skipped, we can't find or they don't have any resources. Can we put a lien on their property?
I'd have to check on that. I'm not sure.
I don't, I mean, it depends upon the amount of write-off we're
Right,
talking about
yeah.
in the situation, because I mean, they've taken a very positive step to move from a renter to a homeowner. And I mean, I think it's constructive. So, you know, I don't,
Yeah, I would be hesitant about being too aggressive.
yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know the total amount off the top of my head. I'm guessing it's not a huge amount.
Smaller, it's a smaller amount, probably.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I have a sort of a question generally on the allowances and going also back to our earlier discussion. And I was thinking one thing that might be helpful for our next meeting to give us a sense of what we're anticipating is maybe rather than just seeing the allowance that shows the 90 days, if we could get reports on the 30 and 60 day delinquencies as well, that would give us a little bit of a look at what we might be anticipating.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions or no? Okay. I think the next item on the agenda then is to discuss extending the use of the PNC Bank line of credit to finance a previously commission-approved action related to Wheaton Gateway. And Eugenia Pascal is going to walk us through that.
Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning, everyone and commissioners. The staff is requesting the BFNA committee for an authorization to recommend for the full commission approval the extension of the use of the PNC line of credit for Wheaton Gateway LLC. The commission has approved in January last year a taxable draw of up to $11,635,000 from the PNC line of credit to fund the acquisition and other costs related to the purchase of the Lindsay Ford holding site. The Lindsay Ford dealership includes a property generally located at 11250 Inverse Mill Road, 6 smaller parcels across East Avenue, 1 smaller parcel at Upton Drive, and several parcels across 11250 Verse Mill Road. The purchase agreement for the Lindsay Ford holding site was executed in April 2017 between HOC and Lindsay Ford. HOC has partnered with the Duffy companies to develop the west side of the Verse Mill site under the gateway concept known as Wheaton Gateway LLC. The total actual draw on the PNC LLC was about $11.5 million as of September 30, 2020, and will mature on January 15, 2021. the amount of interest for FY21 is estimated to be about $121,000 and will be budgeted in the FY22 budget. The staff is recommending extension of the current maturity date through January 15, 2022. And that's all. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
And what happens in 2022? Is that when we get financing?
Kareen, if you're on, maybe you could give a little more. Yeah.
So we are currently going through the entitlement process. And as we've described to you, the plans for the Wheaton redevelopment is anticipated to be phased. And so phase one plans for the site of the former Ambassador building site. And so we would likely continue to extend the financing on the line of credit on a periodic basis until the phase two of this development occurs, or until the commission approves a different financing plan. So we expect that that this part of the site will be developed in phase two, and that the financing will be outstanding or until a different finance plan is presented to the commission.
Well, then why don't we extend the LLC now rather than having to come back and revisit? I mean, we can always pay it off.
Because I think the line of credit matures on a particular date beyond which we could not extend this facility, Cornelia.
So line of credit is September 2021.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we could come back once the line of credit is extended, we could come back and extend it through
longer, right.
that time frame. And so we could plan to do that at least.
So does this extend the current amount through the end of the date of the current line of credit agreement?
It extends it through, what is the actual?
Well, how can you extend it through January 15th, 2022 if the LOC expires in September of 21?
So, I mean, we would expect that either whichever bank we wind up going with would take this on as basically transfer over to the new line of credit. If it's a new bank, stay with PNC if it's with PNC.
Wouldn't that be in our fiscal year 22 anyway, wouldn't it? Because it's September, we would be in fiscal year 22. Correct?
Right, right.
Yeah,
yes,
but
that's correct. Yeah.
But it has us extending this to January of 22, when we technically don't have the ability to extend the LOC past September.
True, but again, the assumption is that whichever bank we wind up with after we go through the process, that these would be transferring over to the new bank.
I'm still not clear. Why wouldn't we just extend this to September? And then in September, we have to make a decision anyway, right?
Correct. I think that's probably the most prudent thing
Okay.
to do, is just amend it to September, and then that forces us to come back and deal with issues anyway.
Okay. We'll make the modification for the
All right.
commission meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, last item on the agenda then is the renewal of the property management contract at Tanglewood Cluster. And
Yes,
Jay
good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Jay Berkowitz, Asset Manager for Property Management. The property management contract with Tanglewood and Sligo Limited Partnership, 527 Dale Drive, Southbridge Apartments and Manchester Manor for property management services is expiring March 31st, 2021. The contract provides for 3 one-year renewals, and the contract was originally awarded in March 2013. Staff requests that the contract for property management services for the Tanglewood cluster be renewed for 1 year with Residential One management. Tanglewood and Sligo is a 132-unit garden-style community located in Silver Spring, consisting of 85 light tech units at 60%, 14 units at 50%, and 33 units at 33% of the median income. The property received a score of 88B for its most recent REACT inspection in 2020, and the property has maintained an average occupancy of 95% over the last 2 years. Manchester Manor is a 53-unit, 6-story mid-rise community built in 1959 and renovated in 1999. The community consists of 5 market and 48 units restricted at or below 60% AMI. The property received a 98A on its most recent REACT in March of 2019, and the property has maintained an average occupancy of 98% over the last 2 years. Southbridge is a 39-unit mixed income community built in 1964 and renovated in 2012, located in Tacoma Park. The property has 19 market units and 20 units restricted at or below 50% AMI, and the property has maintained 97% occupancy over the last 2 years. Dale Drive is a 10-unit garden community built in 1943 and renovated in 2008 with 9 units restricted at or below 40% AMI. The tenant is the Montgomery County Coalition for the Homeless for a 30-year term. The renewal of the property management contract for Tanglewood and Sligo, Manchester Manor, Dale Drive, and Southbridge for 1 year will not have a budget impact, as the costs associated with the services were factored into the calendar year 21 and the fiscal year 21 property budgets. Additionally, the renewal will be performance-based, so the management fee would be lower if revenue declined below budgeted expectations. In addition to occupancy, performance criteria will include REACT scoring. Does anyone have any questions?
Jay, you give the REACT scores for the first 2. I didn't see it for South Bridge or Dale Drive. Do we have REACT scores?
No REACT for those properties.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
This is a very small point, Jay, but in your write-up where you define the original date for the original contract being awarded, that's fine. But obviously it says it's awarded a certain day with renewal contracts. Because obviously we have renewed it since 2013. So we obviously renewed it at 2016, 19, or whenever. So if you could just indicate when the latest renewal was done, it would make more sense to me than going all the way back to the history of it.
I will do that.
A second question I have, Jay, is the chart shows that there are no renewals remaining. Does that mean we'll be renegotiating the base contract next year?
Once it expires, then we'll be putting this out for bid.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, any further questions? Then I guess you have our agreement.
Those were all the items we had for presentation this morning.
Well, thank you very much. And in case we don't get the opportunity, let me wish everybody a very happy holiday season.
Mr. Chair, before you adjourn.
Yes, sir. Always to the chair.
We in the past, we normally have, as a committee, made a recommendation to advance these items forward to the full commission. We haven't had that. We haven't taken any action like that. Is that appropriate or inappropriate? I'm just asking.
Well, we're not approving things, and I guess we need to clarify for our committees under this process What I've done before is, if there haven't been objections, we've let it go forward. I mean, if you want to take formal motions, I guess we can do that. Is it your preference that we do that?
Yeah, I only asked it because at the at our monthly meeting this month, we put off the approval of the minutes for the Development and Finance Committee to have the Development and Finance Committee adopt those minutes. So it seems to me if we're going to have formal minutes adopted, they ought to reflect some formal action that we've taken. Only to say that we are recommending. We're not taking any action to approve.
Right.
We're just simply
Okay.
recommending it forward to the full commission.
Okay.
So I mean, I'm comfortable with checking that with our attorneys if that's appropriate.
No, that's fine. Then I guess let me go back and look at what the actions on each one of those are. Did we?
We agreed on all. We agreed on all. We supported all of them.
No, I know we supported all of them, but I guess, and we could do.
Just a point of information, item number 2 does not go to the full commission,
Yeah.
but all the others do.
The unaudited statements.
Right.
Okay. Then what I would like to put a nail in this one is, if I can get a motion to support the staff recommendations on items 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And in the future, I will try to get a specific action on each one of them.
So I move that action.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Then it's unanimous that items 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 recommendations of staff are supported by the committee for
Consideration
by the full commission.
Very good.
Should we in the future also have minutes from previous meetings to approve for this committee?
Yeah, well, except that we haven't, this is the first, if I'm not mistaken, first meeting that we've had under the new situation of it being a public meeting where minutes are required. So we will in fact have to have minutes
going forward.
Though I think there's a question, I need to talk with Asha about it. Since these are public meetings and we're streaming them, I think we're also recording them. If they're recorded, I'm not sure we actually need written minutes, but I will clarify that with Asha to see how we should go forward. Because as I'm just recalling the OMA, I think there is a statement about minutes and or recorded video, but I'll check with Asha on that. And you might also, Cornelia.
I will.
Because I think Stacy had to leave. Or is Asha on the phone?
Doesn't look like it today.
No. Okay, but that's fine. So we'll check that.
Mm-hmm.
But appreciate the question, Chair Priest. Anything else? All right, then. This meeting is no further business for the committee. Then the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
You were doing your season's greetings.
Oh, I thought I had finished it, but you interrupted anyway. I'll repeat it again. No, seriously. I need to, as we approach the end of the calendar year, really express my appreciation to, as I've done before, and I know that the full commission appreciates the efforts of the staff in these troubling times. I mean, these have been very, very difficult times for all of us. And I think you guys have performed admirably and are putting up with a lot of issues in terms of trying to keep this very large operation functional and at the same time helping our residents to weather the storm, because it's also an issue for them. So I am sure that all of my colleagues will join us in saying thank you, and we wish you all a good holiday and hopefully a better and happy new year.
Thank you.
To a
Thank
better
you.
Great. To
2021.
interrupt, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
I was having difficulty before. This is Heather. I'm Associate General Counsel in the Legal Department. And I just wanted to let you guys know that we'll take a look at the meetings or the minutes rather, that issue and let you know.
Okay. Thank you very much, Heather.
No problem.
All right, thank
Thank
you
you
all.
all.